Where do you live?
In the city.
Do you have a house?
Apartment.
Own or rent?
Rent.
What do you do for a living?
Lots of things.
Where's your office?
I don't have one.
How come?
I don't need one.
Where's your wife?
Don't have one.
How come?
It's a long story.
Do you have kids?
No, I don't.
How come?
It's an even longer story.
Are you my dad's brother?
What's your record for consecutive questions asked?
38.
I'm your dad's brother, all right.
You have much more hair on your nose than my dad.
How nice of you to notice.
I'm a kid, that's my job.
When there's no other babysitter available, one family calls in a relative who has no experience with kids, Uncle Buck. This week, we discuss stinky cigars, the dangers of toothpicks, and organic toilet water. We also weigh in on the Trolls feud that's tearing Hollywood apart before finding out if Uncle Buck stands the test of time.
Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? James says gladiator with a glove, and Alan says as a father blah blah. It's the test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today? Test of time, James and Alan have their say. Do the movies you love still hold up today?
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Test of Time podcast. I'm James Brief, and joining me as always is my podcast partner, the man with two first names, Alan Noah.
That's me, Alan Noah. Two first names. I used to get really annoyed when people would call me Noah by mistake, and then after it happened every single day for my entire life, I just kind of got used to it. You know what always pisses me off about it, though? When people email me. And like the email address clearly says Alan.Noah, or it's like Noah, Alan. And it's that way for the entire company. And everyone should be able to figure it out. But they're like, I bet it's the reverse for this person. Why? Shouldn't it be the same for me? No, I'm just going to assume for no reason that it's backwards for this person. Get it together, people. Get it together.
I will also say that people that spell brief, B-R-E-I-F, why would you assume that the I before E does not apply here? And isn't it just a regular 5-letter word that should be a normal part of people's language?
I agree with you that brief should always be spelled I-E-F, but to be fair, the I before E rule has like 1,000 exceptions. Like, that's not the most consistent rule in the English language.
Would you rather have a fun English fact, a fun astronomy fact, or should we go on?
Let's move on. Let's talk about Universal and AMC theaters having a epic smackdown over Trolls World Tour, which has got to be the stupidest fight in the history of the movie industry. No, I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure there are stupider fights, but this is pretty damn dumb.
Well, I mean, it's a silly fight on its surface, but it actually has some big ramifications. So what's going on is there was a sequel to that Trolls movie, and this movie Trolls World Tour, it was going to be released, but unlike the James Bond films and the Wonder Woman films and everything else that's supposed to be released now, during the pandemic, they decided not to delay the release until after things go back to normal and theaters open, but Universal released Trolls on what they call premium video on demand, like an immediate pay-per-view for like $20, and it sold like gangbusters. I think like $100 million. And they released some kind of statement that said, we're going to be doing this a lot with our movies in the future. And the AMC theater chain, they got very worried about this because why would someone go to an AMC theater for $20 a person and, $50 with all the snacks and everything they're going to get when it's just going to be released for $20 at the same time by Universal. AMC, in response, they said, if Universal does this, we are not going to show any Universal films anymore. So you don't really know who's playing chicken here.
AMC is kind of cutting off their nose to spite their face. A lot of the other movie theater chains are being like, we're not happy about this, but we're not doing anything about it either. And AMC took action, so I guess good for them, but also like not really, because they're hurting their own business. And it is kind of a game of chicken. Who holds more power? the studios that make the movies, well, obviously, the movie theaters need the movies, but also the studios need the movie theaters because, yeah, Trolls World Tour made a ton of money now, but that's because everyone's stuck at home and people are bored and parents have kids that are crawling up the wall. So they'll spend $20 on a movie, but that doesn't mean that they will always do that everyone will always do that. Once movie theaters open, it's an experience going to the movie. And yeah, it is going to be more money to take a family of 4 to see whatever the next kids movie is, as opposed to just spending $20 for Trolls, for an entire family. Yeah, $20 is cheaper, but it's a night out to go to the movies and have dinner and do pizza and popcorn and whatever. Like, I certainly miss that now, being in the 3rd month of quarantine. To me, this Trolls World Tour success, it seems like a thing that's not going to be easily replicated in the future.
I agree with you. I think this is a premature decision by Universal. I think they're getting a little too excited by something that this is not going to replicate. This is lightning in a bottle. I think what's going to happen is there's probably going to be a happy medium. There's definitely this idea that I'd love to sell $20 a pop. I don't care that most people want, $2.99 a rental, because I just have to sell 1/7 of the people at $20. But I think this premium on demand is going to find the right niche. Like what used to be the straight to DVD or direct to video, that's what's going to be this premium stuff. You want to see this new sequel to a Jason Statham film, it's $20 premium on demand, and it'll be on Netflix in a year. So it's up to you. Like, we're not releasing it in the theater for $20. You can watch the whole family $20. Like, that's the deal we're going to make. There's going to be a lot of like $5 to $10 million budget films. Maybe some of these Blumhouse films, the low budget horror films. You're going to see a lot of that stuff on premium on demand, but I don't think this is going to replace theaters.
That very well may be. The theater industry had been hurting, and it will continue to hurt during the pandemic. It will probably continue to hurt after the pandemic. No one really knows how this is all going to shake out, but I can't imagine that it will really stick, that you will never be able to see another Universal movie in any AMC theater. I just kind of doubt it. And honestly, I hope it doesn't stick. I hope someone caves. I don't really care who, but eventually I am going to want to go see the next Jurassic World movie at my local theater, and my local theater happens to be an AMC, and I hope that I can do that. I guess we'll see, but let's talk about another Universal movie, one that came out in 1989, a little film called Uncle Buck.
This film, if you haven't seen Uncle Buck, or it's been a while, this is another John Hughes film that does take place, you guessed it, in the suburbs outside of Chicago. So in this movie, when the grandpa of the family falls ill, mom and dad have to leave town in the middle of the night. All the usual babysitters are unavailable, so they call Uncle Buck. Uncle Buck is broke, unemployed, inexperienced with kids, and he's a stranger to the family. And things don't go well at first. Uncle Buck clashes with the oldest daughter, Tia, when he starts interfering with Tia's relationship with her boyfriend. Tia then gets revenge by messing with Buck and his girlfriend, Shanice. Over time, Tia and Buck make peace. Buck learns about responsibility, and the Russell family grows closer. All thanks to Uncle Buck.
Awe, I guess. It's not an enthusiastic awe, but I'll give you a little bit of an awe.
Did you see this in the theater? I remember seeing this movie in the theater.
We were talking about this movie. I don't know how it came up, but Courtney mentioned like the big giant pancake, which we'll talk about later. But she said, oh yeah, I love that movie. I've seen it a million times when I was a kid. We should show it to the kids. And I was like, oh yeah, I've seen Uncle Buck. And then we sat down the other night and watched it. I was wrong. I had not seen this movie ever before. So no, I didn't see it in the theater and never saw it in the ensuing 31 years.
That's interesting. I mean, it's easy to almost like think you would seen this film because there's a lot of stuff. If there's a Venn diagram of John Hughes films and John Hughes films with John Candy. And if you remember back in the episode when we reviewed Weird Science, that was John Hughes' first film in Hollywood, and it was a big enough hit, a modest enough hit, that he scored a multi-picture deal with Universal for several other films, and because of that, he got a decent budget to make these $10-15 million films. This film was budgeted at $15 million, and this was the final deal in his Universal contract. And this film, with a $15 million budget, opened on August 18th, 1989, and it opened at number one for the weekend with $8.5 million, on its way to $66 million domestically and $80 million worldwide. So on a $15 million budget, it made the Universal a few bucks.
A few Uncle bucks?
Yeah.
Uncle Big Bucks was definitely a headline in Variety in 1989, for sure.
Actually, what probably was talked about in Variety in 1989 was Uncle Buck, a film that had been passed around to a lot of Hollywood actors, or at least discussed. It turns out, according to IMDb, this film had been shopped around Hollywood for a while. I mean, John Hughes had this script, so probably people knew, oh, that guy that's had like 3 or 4 successful films is, making another kind of family film. And people like Tom Hanks and Steve Martin were shopped around. And those guys are kind of nice guys like John Candy. But there's other people that were rumored. People like Danny DeVito and Joe Pesci and Jack Nicholson. It would be a very different film if some of those guys had been cast.
Jack Nicholson? No, I can't imagine him in a John Hughes movie.
I wish Jack Nicholson did more light films, because we're definitely going to review it at some point, but I remember when he did that film with Adam Sandler, Anger Management. I don't remember how well I liked the film, but I just remember thinking, good for him for doing something that's a little bit outside of his role. I mean, he was still, I think, Jack Nicholson crazy in it, but at least he was doing some comedy.
Yeah, I don't think that was too radically different from the characters that, Jack Nicholson can play, from what I remember of that movie.
Right. But, things being more typical are things very typical about John Hughes movies. It opens on the classic suburban house, just like Home Alone and a lot of his other films. And it's got your nuclear family. It's a mom, dad, and 3 kids. You got an adorable young boy and girl. And then there's kind of the grumpy, angsty teen, their daughter Tia.
Right. And we should mention that the daughter Maisie is played by Gabby Hoffman, who you may know from Transparent. And the little boy, Miles, is played by Macaulay Culkin, who, of course, everyone knows as Kevin McAllister. And the oldest daughter, Tia, it's an actress named Jean Louisa Kelly, who I thought kind of had a little bit of like an Ali Sheedy look. And she really hasn't appeared in a ton of other stuff that I recognize from her IMDb page. She had a very small role in Ant-Man, and she's bounced around in a couple of TV shows and things, but really hasn't done a ton of stuff besides this movie. And this was her first major movie role. And she is an angsty teenager for some reason that I didn't really fully get. They basically sort of explain it that she's mad that they just moved into this new house and she misses her friends, kind of. That's sort of the reason. But you don't really get a sense that they're new in town because the house looks very lived in. There's not like boxes anywhere. It's not really clear how long they've been in this house. Also, very early in the movie, she has a line where she's talking to her sister and she says, "We need boys so they can grow up, get married, and turn into shadows." So it seems like she's really angry with her dad, but we don't learn anything about that relationship. Like, why does she think all dads are shadows? Is her dad a shadow? I don't know. They never really explore that. It's weird.
You're right. I think you have to fill in some of the holes yourself. And it said they moved from Indianapolis, so it's definitely a totally new town. And the daughter is, 15-year-old is rightfully, upset about this, but they're pretty new. Even though you're right, there's some clues that they've been there for a while. I think that might be more of, you found the plot hole there. I don't think this young woman has any friends in town, not really. And she's just really mad at everyone because she probably had a whole life back in Indianapolis.
Sure. That very well may be true. They just don't flesh it out. But then the grandparents in this family, I guess the grandpa, has a heart attack. So the parents decide they need to head back to Indianapolis to be with the mom's father, and all of their usual babysitters are busy. They don't want to bring the kids, so they end up calling the father's brother, Buck. And Buck is a bachelor. He's unemployed. He lives in a tiny, crappy apartment that looks to be like right next to Wrigley Field. So cool location, I guess. But he's a loser. He's got this long-term girlfriend, Shanice, and he's going to start working with her the next day. And we see them at dinner, and she's like, "Are you going to come to work? Are you sure you're coming to work? Please tell me you're coming to work." And he's like, "Yeah, of course I will." But then, of course, he doesn't, because he gets this call from his brother. And Buck and his brother are clearly estranged. Buck has a line where he says, "I haven't seen you in years. I haven't been over to the new house since I accidentally started a fire there. Sorry about the barbecue. It was too close to the bushes," or something like that. And that also kind of makes me think that, well, clearly they have been in this house for a long time, because of that line where he says, "I saw you when you first moved into the house, and that was a long time ago." So that kind of took me out of it, because I just couldn't wrap my head around the when of this story. But then Buck decides he's going to go and help his brother out. He'll be there for his family. And he drives from, I guess, Chicago to wherever they are in the suburbs. And he shows up at the wrong house, which is a test of time thing, because obviously nowadays, if he had Waze, he would know which house it was.
You're right, Al. There are some inconsistencies. Has this guy been to this house or not? Because if he's been to the house and had a fire, why would he think it's the wrong house across the street? I guess maybe he says something like all the houses are white. Maybe. I didn't think that joke really landed well. But once he gets in the house, I think there's a lot of funny little lines. The mother, whose father has the heart attack here, she thinks he's a huge loser. And Buck comes in and says, "I want you to know I've quit cigarettes." And the mom gives kind of like this half smile and like, "Oh, like, that's pretty good." But Buck immediately goes, "Yep, now I'm on to cigars. I figure I'll do that for about 5 years. Then I'll go to pipe smoking for another 5. And then it's on to chewing tobacco. And then 5 years after that, the nicotine gum. And I figure I'm good once that's done."
The idea of going from cigarettes to cigars to pipes, I mean, those are all terrible. I had friends in high school and their dad smoked pipes in the car, and I hated getting a ride from their dad. I mean, it was just the worst. Like, I do not like the smell of cigarettes, but I kind of think that pipe smell is even worse.
Speaking of pipe smell, he also asks the mother, "Do you have a good plumber?" And that's an awful thing to say when someone's about to like sleep in your bed and like use your toilet.
Right. I mean, he says he's been eating too much cheese and the cheese doesn't agree with him. Yeah, not the kind of thing you want to hear from a person who's going to be staying in your home for a long time. The mom also says that she will leave blank checks so that Buck will have money. That also does not stand the test of time. Now you would just leave a credit card or just connect on Venmo or something. The whole concept of checks in general, I think we've talked about in the podcast before. Like, anytime I have to write a check for anything, I get pissed off. Like, really? You only accept checks? Ugh. But, you know, in 1989, that's how you paid for stuff.
That is. And you point out a couple of little plot holes that I didn't really pick up on some of those, but one I totally picked up on was this strange idea that the kids wake up in the morning and, you know, they're surprised to find this Uncle Buck there. My shock is, why didn't the parents wake the kids and tell them that, you know, mom and dad are going to be gone for a week and a stranger that you've never met is going to be taking care of you and bringing you to school and feeding you and anything you need, like, ask him? I'm not a parent, but Al, that seems to be an odd thing. It's not like the grandpa was shot and they had to immediately drive him to hospital, no time to wake the kids. No, I mean, they seem to have packed a suitcase and stuff. It seems a weird plot hole there.
Yeah, I mean, I could understand not wanting to wake up the little kids in the middle of the night and be like, "Oh, grandpa had a heart attack. We have to go right now." Well, go back to sleep, good night, because obviously those kids would just be like upset and have nightmares and not be able to go back to sleep. But I don't know, at least tell the teenager, look, reassure your brother and sister that Uncle Buck is, a good guy, and say something to her at least. Maybe put the responsibility on her. But yeah, it is a little bit weird because as far as the younger kids are concerned, Uncle Buck is a total stranger. Luckily, the kids sort of like Uncle Buck right away, the little kids, I mean, because he's a big goofball. But Tia despises him immediately. Just right out of the gate in their very first conversation, she is furious with him. I didn't really understand why. I mean, he gets up early, he's making breakfast, and he's making food that's a little too complicated for the kids. And, the little boy just wants to have cereal, and he's making like a big fancy dish. So, okay, he's getting it wrong, but at least he's trying. Like right out of the gate, the guy is trying. From there, though, he really starts to embarrass the kids when he drives them to school, and his car is a really old piece of crap, and it makes this huge backfire noise when it stops. That joke does not stand the test of time because it sounds like a gunshot, and a quote-unquote joke about a gunshot at a school nowadays isn't funny.
In Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, they had a completely destroyed car, which was funny. And they're going for the same joke here, but I agree, just it did not stand up correctly. Buck, he wants to be a good uncle, but he doesn't get what to do. I love that when Miles gets to school, he opens up his lunch that Uncle Buck packed him, and it's like a can of sardines, and like it's just ridiculous stuff, and he just goes, would anyone be interested in a possible lunch trade? And everyone is, no, hell no.
Right. I mean, that's one of those things where Buck is trying and it's not really working with the little kids, but it's way worse with Tia. When Buck picks up Tia after school, she is making out with her boyfriend, Bug. And just right out of the gate, I have to say, horrible naming to have your main character be Buck, B-U-C-K, and your main female character's boyfriend be Bug, B-U-G. That's just like an annoying thing. Like John Hughes as a screenwriter should have known better than to do that. I guess the name Bug just makes it extremely clear to the audience that Bug is a bad guy. He's a little bit older, and Uncle Buck hates Bug. And right away is like against that relationship and against them making out. And he seems to be like on this mission to like protect his niece, which I get that you want to be protective of family members, but like it just felt weird to me because for him, Tia is basically a stranger. He doesn't really have a close relationship with her.
Yeah, I see what you're getting at. And Buck immediately sees that Bug is a total loser. And this is confirmed later in the film, and we'll get to that, when Bug, is only after Tia because he wants to have sex with her. The thing is, Buck figures this out right away, which, good for him for figuring this out, and he's trying to protect Tia because Tia doesn't see that Bug is a loser yet. I agree with you. There should have been a subtle thing, like Bug should have grabbed Tia's waist, and she flicks him off. Like, no, stop that. And you're right, there really is no reason other than the fact that his name is Bug for him to realize that this guy is what he later is revealed to be later, basically a rapist.
Right. I totally agree that Bug is awful and that Buck has some good points. I just didn't really understand like how he came to that conclusion instantly. There's a moment where the mom calls home and you have some more test of time things because it's a landline. And so Tia is listening in on the phone conversation, just putting her hand over the receiver, which is totally a thing that I did. And I know my sister did. And like everyone did back in the 80s when you only had one phone line, you could like sneakily listen. There's a great moment where Buck is asking the mom about the plates because she had these antique plates, and earlier in the movie, Buck like dropped one and you think it's going to break and it actually doesn't. And then he's like, oh, this is pretty sturdy. And he kind of like bangs it on the piano and then it shatters. I thought that was a pretty funny gag. And then Buck is talking to her and is like, so those plates, are those pretty old? Where would you get a replacement for those? In an antique store? And it's just not at all subtle about what he's getting at or what happened. He also mentions the fact that he hasn't been giving the dog water and the dog has just been drinking the blue toilet water. That's also a test of time thing. Why was it that in the 80s, and I guess maybe in the 90s too, why is it that everyone thought that blue toilet water was like an important thing?
I think if you saw the blue mixed in, you were convinced that there was a chemical, and remember this is back when chemical meant good. You would be happy that the cleanser is mixing, and now we just want natural, cage-free, organic toilet water.
Cage-free?
Well, cages will not work in trapping toilet water.
I mean, fair point.
I do love what he says about the blue water, though. He says that the dog's been drinking the toilet water, and he goes, that would account for the coloration on the grass. He actually used the word coloration, which I thought was good. There's a really good subtle dynamic that the mom thinks he's a loser, and Buck is actually coming around to realizing how much the mom hates him. Because there's a little sad part when Buck is sitting around the house, and you get the idea that he's like, wow, a house. This is so different for him, like a couch and books to read. And he looks at an old wedding photo of his brother and his sister-in-law, and he's like, oh, that's sweet. And he pulls it out. It turns out that the picture with Buck in the photo is folded over. That's really insulting.
I don't think it's that shocking for Buck. I mean, he knows that his sister-in-law hates him, but it's clearly a strained relationship. He tries to do something nice for the kids. He takes them to a bowling alley. He seems to know everybody in this bowling alley, which confused me in terms of geography because he seems to live in Chicago and now he's in the suburbs. Did he take the kids all the way into Chicago for his local bowling alley? Does he hang out at a suburban alley very far away from where he lives because of a league or something? I didn't really get that.
I think he actually does take them to Chicago. I think it's ridiculous. And I think he takes them, maybe not to Chicago exactly, but the Chicago city limits. Because he thinks of, all right, I'm going to my bowling place. It's only a half hour away, whatever. Once we get into the bowling alley, there's a really adorable part where Maisie, she rolls the ball, and it rolls so slowly that it hits the front pin and doesn't knock it over. And Buck says, if the object of this game was to get the closest to the pins without knocking them over, you'd be world champion. And I thought that was very cute. You've seen these little kids put the bowling ball on the ground and roll it with two hands.
And then I can tell you as a father, the ball gets stuck halfway down the lane and you're not supposed to go and walk down the lane to get the ball because that's bad bowling ball lane etiquette. But then it's yeah, but if you just wait for someone to help you, sometimes you're waiting forever and then it's just easier to just go and get it. And then they shake their finger at you, but whatever. Come on, we just want to keep playing. Also, those bumpers in bumper bowling, that can also make it go slower. If you just kind of watch the ball bounce back and forth, 6 times, it's not going to have a lot of speed to get to the pins. It's just not.
Yeah. The other part of this scene that I love, that has made me cringe my entire life anytime I've ever seen a person suck on a toothpick, is because in this scene, there's this loser that comes up to Tia and he's hitting on her. And, Tia's a 15-year-old girl. So, already this guy's kind of a loser. And he's twirling a toothpick in his mouth, over and over in circles. And at one point gets it stuck on the roof of his mouth and under his tongue. It's so gross. And he just has to pick it out. And it always makes me cringe.
I mean, I have been known to use a toothpick to pick my teeth. Even just saying that sounds so disgusting. But I do remember once I had a toothpick in my mouth and Courtney just kind of gave me an impromptu kiss and the toothpick, poked her in the lip and she was really mad at me. You got to be careful with those things. They are sharp. They can hurt. Public service announcement from the test of time. I also did just want to mention that the guy in the bowling alley who goes over to Uncle Buck with a tip about a horse, because apparently Buck is a gambler who makes a lot of his money betting on horses. That guy, I don't know if he looked familiar to you, but he's Jackie from The Marvelous Miss Maisel. obviously much younger in this movie, but you can kind of tell just from like, the shape of his face and everything.
Yeah, and Buck probably like once or twice a year gets one or two big scores at the racetrack, and that's how he funds his finances. And there's a couple other really adorable things that he does with the kids. There's one line I really like, and he goes to the kids and he's like, "Did you guys brush your teeth?" And they go, "Yes." And you could check, our toothbrush is wet. And he goes, I have a friend at the police lab, and he can run a test and find out if there's really toothbrushing going on or if you just ran it underwater. And the kids are immediately like, "Oh no, we're going to have to actually brush our teeth." There's this cute little montage to the Mr. Sandman song, that old cute Mr. Sandman from the 50s that I'm sure you associate with Back to the Future, right, Al?
Oh, of course. As soon as I hear those opening notes, I immediately think of Back to the Future, for sure.
Yeah, and this montage deals with the fact that the kids love Buck, and they insist on sleeping in the bed with him, and throughout the night they're encroaching on his space, and Buck can't get any of the blankets or any of the pillows, and Buck even tries going to the floor to sleep, but the kids think it's awesome to sleep on the floor with Uncle Buck, so they move to the floor too, and then they wake up like all on top of each other. It's very, very cute. And finally, it turns out that it's Miles' birthday, Macaulay Culkin's character, and Buck, he doesn't know really what to do for these kids. Earlier he had tried to make the kids like this like sausage and pepper hash for breakfast, and the kids of course don't want this like hangover breakfast, so he decided to make them pancakes, but this was his birthday, so it was going to be over the top pancakes.
He makes these massive, huge pancakes for the kids, and it's a great visual gag. I have no idea how he was able to cook them, because it seems like this huge skillet appears out of nowhere. Like, I really didn't understand that. It is funny watching John Candy, like, flip it over with a shovel. I wish I could make pancakes that big, just for the look on the kids' faces. But it's a sweet moment. Also, there's another sweet moment where the daughter, Maisie, is getting in trouble at school because apparently she is a dreamer and the assistant principal doesn't like that. So there's a meeting and Uncle Buck is trying to not mention the fact that the assistant principal has a big wart or a mole on her chin. And so it's like that old comedy trope where he's trying to not talk about it, so all he does is mention it, and every other word is like melanoma, wart, growth on your face. And eventually he defends his niece and says, the world needs kids who have imagination, and we don't need people like you, and here's a quarter, go downtown and have a rat gnaw that thing off your face. And I was a little bit perplexed about that line at first. I'm like, why would you pay a rat to gnaw something off your face? I think he just meant to like take the bus downtown and then find the rat. I don't know. It could have been a much better send-off line, I think. I think they made it unnecessarily complicated.
Well, it was an interesting line. I think this scene is great. I agree with you that the mole line doesn't really hit. There was a joke, I think, in one of the Austin Powers films when Fred Savage has a mole and all Austin Powers can say is, "Mole, mole, mole, I'm mole sorry." It's not a very funny joke.
Right.
But this is the scene that I was thinking, oh boy, if Joe Pesci had been Uncle Buck, this would have been an unbelievable scene. But as it was, the scene is another way that Buck really cares about the kids, but he has to win over Tia. And Tia, unfortunately, still is mad at Buck because she's trying to go out with Bug and he's embarrassing her. And later, there's a part where Shanice, Buck's girlfriend, she calls the house and probably wants to speak to Uncle Buck. And Tia answers the phone and is like, "Oh, he's across the street at Marcy's home. He hangs out with Marcy all nights of the week, very late at night. Can I leave a message for him when he gets back?" And of course, she knows what she's doing. And Shanice hangs up the phone very pissed off, and the next day decides to come over.
Right. I have no idea how she knows where Buck is. Like, he never gave her the address. Seems a little odd.
Test of time, though, actually. Probably what they did in 1989 is Shanice looked up the last name, the phone book, and she knew the town. That's what you did in 1989.
Maybe. I mean, their last name is Russell, so it is a fairly common name, but All right, I'll overlook that. And Buck is dancing with Marcy in the living room, who, by the way, is played by Laurie Metcalf, who's probably best known for her role on Roseanne, or I guess now it's known as The Connors. She was also in Lady Bird a few years ago, really good in that. Then Shanice storms out, and Tia has her revenge, and she's going out to this party with Bug. It happens to be on the night when Buck really wants to go to the track, so he can use that tip about that horse from earlier at the bowling alley and make a ton of money. But Buck decides he needs to go after his niece. He needs to do the right thing. He asks Shanice to come over and look over the younger kids. P.S. The moment when Macaulay Culkin is sitting by the door and he's like grilling her when Shanice gets there and is asking for ID. Apparently that is what led John Hughes to the idea for Home Alone. So interesting little fun fact there. But, Buck shows up at this teenage party and he's looking for Tia. Somehow he's holding a beer as he's wandering through this party. I was like, wait, did he stop at the keg? Like, if he's on a mission to protect his niece, maybe skip the beer right now,
Someone probably handed him the beer, and he probably figured, why not? I wasn't looking for a beer, but a beer's a beer, and I'm Uncle Buck, so I'm gonna drink a beer.
More like Uncle Beer. Sorry, that was terrible. And while Buck is making his way through the party, we see Bug in a bedroom, putting the moves on this girl, and she's saying no, 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 and he's being really aggressive. And then Buck opens the door with a huge drill, with a massively long drill bit that he drills into the door lock. He kicks open the door, and then there's a big reveal that this girl who we all assumed was Tia is not Tia. It is just some other young teen girl that Bug is putting the moves on.
Yeah, and Tia is walking alone, kind of solemnly, and Buck drives up to her very slowly, and he's like, do you want to talk about what happened? She goes, no, not really, and Buck realizes what happened, and so does the audience. Obviously, we realize that Bug is, he's a rapist, and he tried to do the same thing with Tia, and I think we're supposed to assume it didn't go as planned, and that's why Bug probably picked another victim. But Tia, she's, getting along with Buck a little bit, thanks for picking me up, and she's like, well, what'd you do with Bug? And he just gives a look and goes, well, let me show you. And then he opens up his trunk, and Bug is bound, he's gagged, and his hands are duct taped together.
And then, Buck lets him go, and then as Bug is running away, Buck is, hitting these golf balls at him. God, the Buck-Bug thing, it's so confusing. But anyway, watching that, I was like, wait a second. This is, not much of a punishment for this sexual predator who just gets, hit in the head by a couple of golf balls. But then the flip side of that is he was also kidnapped, bound and gagged, and thrown in the trunk of a car from an adult who had threatened to kill him earlier. Earlier in the movie, Uncle Buck, threatened him with a hatchet. It was a very small hatchet, but even still, this would not look good for Buck if it reached a court of law.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't really want to be Bug and have to face discovery of, what were you doing at this party that may have angered this young woman, or, they wouldn't want to get the witness of that other young woman that Buck rescues. Bug he says his dad's a lawyer, so he's probably one of the rich kids in town, and as we know, unfortunately, these guys probably get away with these things. And I think Buck just figured, I'm not going to actually murder him. You can't get away with murdering him. And he's not going to really cut him up or anything. So he takes a few swings of his golf club and hits the guy with his 9-iron with a golf club at 10 yards away. That is really painful. I mean, not adequate justice for the attempted rape of your niece, but I guess it's maybe the best he could do in the situation.
Right. And now things start to wrap up. Buck and Tia have made up, and Buck makes up with Shanice, because Tia confesses and says that he really wasn't hanging out with Marcy, the neighbor, and she made that up. And Buck and Shanice patch things up, and the parents finally come home, and there's this big moment where Tia is going to be reunited with her parents, and she's been so nasty to them, and everyone else is in the kitchen. There's like this kitchen island, and they have all of the pots and pans like hanging over the island. I don't know what you call those things. A rack, I guess?
Yeah, it's just a rack with all the beautiful things, and everything is going lovely, and the parents are reuniting with the kid, and everything is better, and Uncle Buck has fixed everything, and the music is elevating. But then Uncle Buck leans on that hanging dishware and the entire thing comes crashing down, like 40 pots and pans. You know, the crash lasts like 10 seconds. He was so happy about everything and he just lets out one. He can't hold it anymore. Just shit. I thought it was very funny.
Is this movie rated PG? Because there definitely are a lot of curses. I know that like in the 80s that was kind of allowed. Maybe PG-13? I'm curious. PG. I just pulled it up on IMDb. It is rated PG. And yeah, they do throw around quite a few shits. That might be it. Maybe ass. I don't know.
It's only implied rape, Al.
Right.
It's only attempted. Two attempts at rape, but neither were successful. So that in 1989 was practically a G film.
Sure. And Tia has this nice moment with her mom. They hug. She and her mom were fighting earlier, but she was also really angry at her dad, and there doesn't seem to be any resolution there. Whatever. And Shanice and Buck, they leave the house and they say that they'll be back and they'll visit. And you get the sense that there's going to be a nice closeness now. They're going to get along. Everything's going to be better. And the movie ends on a freeze frame. I knew it was going to happen. Just like watching that scene, I'm like, they're going to end it on a freeze frame, aren't they? And yup, they did. John Hughes just couldn't resist, I guess.
It's the exact same freeze frame as Planes, Trains, and Automobiles that John Hughes also directed, except this time no mustache on John Candy.
So, James, this is the end of the movie. Do you think that Uncle Buck stands the test of time?
I'm not sure if you're aware, but this film has been adapted for television twice. It's been a sitcom, I think, on CBS and the USA Network called Uncle Buck, and it's a perfectly adaptable movie. It's basically uncle that doesn't fit in moves in. It works. Neither sitcom worked, but the story is pretty pedestrian. There's nothing special about it, but I feel that it's well directed. I think it's got a great lead actor in John Candy and a surprisingly good supporting cast. I think the young actress that played Tia, I think she was very good in the film. I think Gabby Hoffman is, she's a very good actress. As you said, she's a professional. You know, we all know Macaulay Culkin. He's a professional actor. And,
well,
I think a lot of things in this film do work. And, what doesn't work? You've pointed out to me a couple things that don't. There are just some plot holes. You're right. I was probably a little biased by the fact that his name is Bug. But that being said, Bug is a total piece of shit, as we're told later. But I agree with you that Buck doesn't really have a valid reason for knowing this. And I have to say that Uncle Buck is the kind of film that I've seen a couple times. I saw when I was a kid. I saw probably like 10 years ago and now. And I remember 10 years ago thinking that, oh, Uncle Buck, he's too much of a jerk. He shouldn't be embarrassing them. Like, that's a little over the top. But when I look at it now, Buck is a total loser. He really wants to be part of the family's life, but he never got around to it and maybe felt it was just too late to get involved. And he wins over the kids, but he wants to win over the daughter, but maybe even more importantly, he wants to win over the mother, the sister-in-law that always hated him and thinks he's a big loser. And it's apparent that the parents let Tia do whatever they want, which in some ways Tia likes, but in some ways they're letting Tia go off with this monster. And Buck, he might go over the top. He doesn't know how to take care of these little kids. He doesn't know how to talk to the vice principal or talk to Tia or any of these people. And he's trying the best he can. While I think the character is flawed, and while I think the screenplay has some holes in it, I have to say that it was charming. And, John Candy, he was just such a delight. And I think this film works. Is it an amazing film? No. I think it gives you pretty much what you're expecting. And yeah, I think the movie stands the test of time. What do you think, Al? 1989's Uncle Buck. I know there's some flaws, but what is your opinion? Does it stand the test of time?
I mean, I really was distracted by a lot of these plot holes. It's just a lot of things that don't make sense. How long have they been in this house? What bowling alley are they at? How does Uncle Buck keep finding Tia when she's like making out with Bug in the middle of the woods at some bonfire? How does everyone know where everyone else is at all times? There's just a lot of things like that that really don't add up. Those are plot holes, and I found them to be distracting. More than that, though, is the lack of character beats. You said something earlier about like, well, I think you have to kind of fill in some of the gaps in your head. And honestly, that's kind of frustrating, especially because John Hughes is a really good writer specifically about teens. Like in The Breakfast Club, he writes about teen angst masterfully, and you feel for those kids and you understand what they're going through and you understand why they hate their parents. Tia, I don't know why she hates her parents. I don't understand what she's going through. You know, there's a fine line between subtlety, which I like, and like just not filling in any of the details. I think this movie kind of falls in the category of just not filling in details. It seems kind of lazy, which again is out of character for John Hughes. There is this theme where Tia is a kid who's trying to grow up really fast, and Uncle Buck is an adult who's trying to stay a kid. And then in the end, Uncle Buck decides to grow up a little bit, and Tia decides she's going to be a kid a little bit more. And I get that, and I appreciate that they don't beat you over the head with that, but it's still just a lot of stuff that isn't really addressed the right way. Like, Uncle Buck's arc really is just, he matures a little bit, but from the get-go, he's really trying with the kids and he's got a good heart. You don't really see him go on that much of a journey. I don't know. I think that John Hughes is capable of a lot more and a lot better. And overall, I was just disappointed with this movie. There were a couple of gags that were pretty funny, but I didn't think it was that hilarious overall. I'm going to say that Uncle Buck does not stand the test of time. Quick sidebar, though. One thing about this movie does stand the test of time, which is the Uncle Buck bowling alley. Apparently, there's like a chain of them in real life. I don't know that they're based on the movie, but it is a thing that exists. I know there's one in Connecticut. Have you ever seen one of those in real life?
No, I haven't.
It's like all about being under the water, which does not relate to the bowling alley in this movie. So I don't know what the connection is, if there is a connection, but anyway, just thought I'd mention that.
And, you know, I could see this film being remade. You could do this film with a good script and Jack Black in the lead role, something like that.
Why? Because he's fat? It can only be a fat guy, James? Is that what you're saying?
No, not at all. The reason is because I just recently saw the Jumanji sequels. I had already seen Welcome to the Jungle, but I saw The Next Level. And Jack Black, I've forgotten how good he is. He's very, very funny.
Yes, I am a big Jack Black fan as well. All right, that's going to do it for us this week. Next week, we are going to start a Robin Hood trilogy. We're going to start off with Disney's Robin Hood, the 1973 movie. Then the following week, we'll do Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. And then after that, the Mel Brooks parody, Robin Hood, Men in Tights. Why? Why not? I don't know. Because we feel like it. That's why. So that's going to be a ton of fun. Please, everybody, keep talking to us on social media. We are at Test of Time Pod on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We got a lot of really nice messages after our 200th episode last week. I do want to give a shout out to Christopher McBride, who wrote to us on Facebook a really nice message. He said, "Hi, I found your podcast a couple of months ago while using Spotify for the first time. I'm enjoying your podcast mainly because the premise is different compared to all of the bad movie podcasts." Well, thank you, Christopher. Really appreciate that you're listening. We hope you continue to enjoy the show. And yeah, everyone keep talking to us, and we'll see you next week.
Take care, everyone.